Exactly 47 seconds into a nationally televised hearing, J.D. Vance smirked like a man tossing a match on gasoline, then unleashed 9 words that cut through the room like a razor. Fake degree night school. He doesn't belong here. The air shifted, but Denzel Washington didn't blink. He sat back in his chair, calm as the eye of a storm, opened a leather folder with fingers that moved slow, deliberate. What happened next didn't just wreck a reputation, it rattled the core of the nation's conscience. The truth Denzel carried wasn't loud, but it was nuclear. The kind of truth that doesn't just bruise pride, it vaporizes it. It turned a Harvard-polished senator into a blank stare on live TV. Vance had thrown his shot like it was nothing. Like ordering a coffee, some of us worked to earn real legal minds, he said, voice slick, oozing smugness. Others collected diplomas like coupons. The room turned to stone. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. That silence felt like a weight pressing on every chest in there. The words didn't just hover, they prowled. They curled through the air, sinking teeth into every person who had ever worked twice as hard to be noticed once. J.D. Vance didn't blink. He adjusted his tie like a man pleased with his own reflection, pretending he hadn't just tried to peel dignity off someone in front of the world. His tone stayed easy, his posture loose, rehearsed. He didn't have to say Denzel Washington's name. Everybody in that room knew exactly who the dagger was aimed at. Denzel stayed motionless. Camera 2 crept in close. No flinch, no sigh, just an iron stare and a firm hand resting on the leather folder like a lion's paw on a quiet jungle floor. This wasn't the silence of uncertainty. This was calculation, precision. Denzel's body didn't move, but the room felt like it tilted. Vance leaned back, cocky, tapping his pen against the desk, like a man who thought he'd just dropped the mic. You could almost hear the smugness leaking out of his pores, but the rest of the room, they weren't so sure anymore. Up in the press box, a producer lowered his headset mid-sentence. A young aide forgot to keep typing. A whisper floated across the gallery. Did he just really say that? Social media detonated within seconds. Quotes flying, captions multiplying. Did Vance just call Denzel's degree fake? Coupons, seriously. But Denzel didn't react. Didn't stand up, didn't speak. His silence turned volcanic, hotter, heavier than any insult. It wasn't the kind of quiet you get when someone's shocked. This was the kind of quiet before thunder. The kind where you know something's coming, and it's coming heavy. Denzel's fingers flexed just a little, curling around the edge of that folder, but didn't open it. Vance cut a glance his way, maybe waiting for a rebuttal, maybe hoping for one. But Denzel stared straight through him like glass. Like he'd seen this before? Different face, same script, same weak attack. He knew this game, and he knew the power move wasn't to swing back yet. It was to let the insult twist in the wind. To let the world watch you eat it like breakfast and smile back. Later, when they try to strip you down in front of the world, you don't flinch. You don't fold. You don't even blink. You wait. You let them think they won right before you burn the whole script down. And across America, millions leaned in. Not to hear what Denzel would say, but to feel the moment when he'd finally strike, because silence like that doesn't stay quiet. Not when it's loaded like a bullet. J.D. Vance thought he was playing chess, cool and confident. His words dripped from his mouth like an executioner reading a sentence. Some of us work to earn real legal minds. Others collect diplomas like coupons. That line sliced the room like steel on ice. No one smiled. Even his own people sat a little lower, some shifting like they wanted to disappear. The chair of the committee hesitated, unsure whether to gavel in or pretend his ears were broken. It wasn't subtle. It was surgical. Vance didn't need to say Denzel's name. His gaze had already carved the direction straight across the floor like a sniper shot. Denzel sat unbothered, carved out of stone. Camera 2 froze on his profile. Not a flicker, not a twitch. Just the calm hold of a man who's had worse, said to his face by better men. His finger slid across the leather folder, firm, patient, calculating. He wasn't confused. He wasn't shocked. Denzel had already mapped out the next 5 moves, and they wouldn't be made here. Outside that chamber, America held its collective breath. Coffee cups paused mid-sip. Phones dangled in hands mid-scroll across platforms. Hashtags ignited, hashtag fake degree, hashtag coupons, hashtag Vance meltdown. Clips flew across. Timelines dissected, debated, headlines writing themselves. Meanwhile, Vance leaned back slow, tapping his pen again. Like a man signing off on his own downfall, smiling like he just won something. But the whole country could already feel it. This wasn't victory. This was the calm before a storm named Denzel. He thought it was over. It WASN single quotes 2. Denzel Washington didn't flinch. And that made it worse. He sat there like a fuse wound, tight, but not lit, not yet. But the tension was obvious, coiled, lethal. The room could feel it in their bones. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to slap a label on him based on the school written on his degree. He'd heard worse in courtrooms where the ceiling leaked and the walls whispered of poverty. He'd been called the diversity prop, the angry one, the street lawyer. He'd heard it in backroom deals. In whispered insults, but never like this. Never broadcast to millions. Never with an entire chamber too gutless to stop it. And that made this different because this wasn't about Denzel anymore. This was about every black man who earned his way without a trust fund. Every first-gen kid who studied under street lamps. Every underdog who'd been told night school like it was a punchline but got the job done anyway. The pen stopped. Tapping. Cameras stayed locked in. J.D. Vance smiled without even looking up, thinking he'd just delivered the kind of line that would be replayed on primetime soundbites. But across the table, Denzel's thumb pressed against the zipper. Pull of that leather folder, slow, intentional. Then it stopped. He didn't open it, not yet. Because real lawyers, the ones forged in the trenches, the ones with scars beneath the suits, they don't jump at every insult. They wait. They wait for the perfect moment to drop the hammer. The real moment that can't be spun or walked back. The kind that leaves people quiet in their cars driving home, replaying it in their heads. So Denzel didn't speak. Not when the insult landed like a cheap shot. Not when the atmosphere turned thick enough to choke. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't lunge for the mic like some rookie trying to win a headline. Because Denzel didn't come here to win the moment. He came to own the room. And he knew exactly how to do that. That silence wasn't hesitation. It was history. It was every courtroom where his footsteps echoed louder than the men wanted. Where his voice stayed low, deliberate enough to make judges lean forward and opponents shuffle uncomfortably in their seats. Where his skin, his roots, his neighborhood had spoken before his mouth ever did. Years before the cameras, before the microphones, before congressional hearing rooms filled with fake smiles, Denzel had stood in some forgotten courtroom with no air conditioning and ceiling tiles drooping like broken promises. The air had smelled of sweat, anxiety, and a busted system. His client, a teenage kid with more bruises than birthdays, facing 20 years for something he hadn't done. Denzel had been underpaid, overlooked, and handed a case file with barely 48 hours to prepare. But he showed up. He always showed up. During a break, the opposing attorney leaned in like they were picking off a weak animal and said it straight-faced. They're sending street lawyers now. That guy thought Denzel would crack. Thought he'd get loud. Thought he'd break. But Denzel just smiled. Slow, patient, dangerous. Then he dismantled the man's entire case, piece by piece. Shattered the prosecution's key witness and cross. Found surveillance footage they'd missed. Quoted case law. So precise, the judge had to reach for his own notes. The verdict came back, not guilty. Under an hour, that lawyer left, gripping his briefcase like it might stop the shame from leaking out. That wind didn't hit headlines. But it made Denzel, because that day, Denzel learned something no Ivy League class could ever teach you. The loudest man in the room doesn't win. The calmest one does. And right now, just feet away from J.D. Vance, Denzel didn't feel fury. He felt recognition. JD was just another pretty suit echoing a system that had tried and failed to shut Denzel down more times than he could count. Another man who confused his resume with his worth. Another voice who mistook arrogance for strength. And most of all, another man who couldn't spot danger, even when it was staring him dead in the face, because real danger doesn't shout, it waits. Denzel's fingers traced that zipper again. The leather felt heavier, not because it had changed, but because the whole moment had shifted. Inside that folder were facts, names, timelines, decisions. Receipts stacked thicker than the tension swirling through that room. JD didn't know it, but he was standing in his own wildfire. He just didn't realize who was holding the match. Denzel's eyes flicked toward him once, just once. And it wasn't the look of a man rattled. It was the look of someone who had survived worse and was now choosing just how loud he wanted the fallout to be. So if the whole country sat waiting for your answer, if the only thing between calm and chaos was the silence caught in your throat, what would you do? 12 seconds stretched like an eternity. Nobody spoke. JD's fake G** across America, millions didn't just see a letter being read. They watched a man unravel, frame by frame, in real time. Not because he lost a debate, but because there had never been a debate to begin with. The only thing louder than the silence in the chamber was the deafening weight of truth settling into every corner of that hearing. Time seemed to freeze. No one spoke. The chamber felt suspended in air, unsure whether it had just witnessed a takedown or the start of something even bigger. JD Vance tapped his pen once, twice. But not to take notes, just to distract from the crumbling confidence pooling beneath his chair. Then came his response. Flat, forced, clipped with condescension. Nice stories, JD muttered. They make for good theater, but not real lawyers. No gasps, no outrage, just quiet recognition. This wasn't shock anymore. It was routine, but it felt weaker. JD wasn't on a fence anymore. He was surviving. JD leaned back, trying to reclaim space, to look like the one still in control. But Denzel didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't even look bothered. He looked clinical, like a scientist watching a test subject fail the same simple puzzle again and again. One finger tapped on the table, sharp and clean. Let's test that, Denzel said, voice low, smooth, but carrying the weight of inevitability, like a man suggesting an experiment where he already knew the result. JD didn't reply, not immediately. That confidence of a minute ago was gone. His footing wasn't steady anymore. Denzel reached for the folder resting beside him, the same one he'd carried in without fanfare. He didn't flip it open, just rested his hand on it like a vault that needed a code only he possessed. Around the chamber, bodies leaned forward. Breath slowed. Something was coming. They couldn't see it yet, but they felt it. JD gave a short, dry laugh. Mr. Washington, if this is about another love letter from some judge who liked your style. Denzel lifted his palm, smooth, commanding, without raising his voice. No, Senator, he said evenly. This time, you'll be doing the talking. That got JD's attention. Denzel slid a crisp document forward. No theatrics, just control. A proposed amendment to the Congressional Ethics Code. Each word chosen, like a scalpel. At the top, a commitment to legal accuracy. At the bottom, a line waiting for JD Vance's signature. JD scanned it, lips curling in a scoff. And this proves what exactly? Denzel tilted his head, cool, composed. That you either read what you sign, or you don't. JD's jaw clenched. The pen was in his hand before he realized it. Cameras clicked like distant thunder. Across the country, America leaned in, silent, breath caught mid-air. And Denzel Washington, steady and unshaken, let the smallest edge of a knowing smile tug at the corner of his mouth. Not cruel, just surgical. Because this wasn't rebuttal. This was an autopsy. And Denzel Washington held the scalpel. The chamber leaned in, breath caught between shock and curiosity. Cameras hovered like restless wasps, capturing every twitch, every glance, every micro-expression. J.D. Vance had just tried to reduce Denzel Washington's hard-earned career to a punchline. Now the silence belonged to Denzel, and it was his to break. With smooth precision, Denzel pulled out a crisp folder and placed a 2-page document on the table. Not loud, not flashy like setting a blade on silk. Still in that controlled, quiet tone, Denzel turned his head and said, "This is a proposed pledge for constitutional reform support. Basic, clear, uncomplicated. The kind of document anyone claiming to value legal clarity should sign without hesitation." He tapped the signature line with the end of his pen, like a conductor setting tempo before an overture. JD's ego was still inflated. One dismissive glance, quick and cocky. "Gladly," he said, already grabbing the pen. Happy to back some real reform. His signature dragged across the page sloppy, fast, reckless. A skid mark instead of a signature. Denzel didn't stop him, didn't rush him. He waited, calm, silent, counting every second like a chess master watching an opponent walk straight into mate. When JD's hand lifted from the page, Denzel slid the document back toward himself. No flourish, no drama, just discipline. His finger stayed steady. His expression didn't shift. Only his voice changed, just a shade sharper. "Page 2, line 11, Denzel said quietly, evenly. "Read it aloud for us." Senator J.D. frowned, blinked, leaned forward, eyes scanning the fine print he hadn't bothered to read before signing. His smirk faltered. His lips moved, stumbling. "Over the line, legal precedent may be treated as non-binding guidance in future constitutional amendments," he read. The words hit him slower than they hit the room, but once they landed hard. "That's not what I meant to sign," JD muttered, voice cracking. "You did sign it," Denzel cut in smoothly, never raising his tone. "And you did. So on national television, in front of the American people, endorsing a direct contradiction of the foundational principles of U.S. constitutional law." The temperature in the room dropped. The air itself felt dense, suffocating. Staffers exchanged quick, wide-eyed looks. Phones buzzed on silent. The clip was already halfway around the internet before JD finished realizing what had just happened. Jade's mouth opened, closed. He had nothing. He'd walked into a trap built not on trickery, but on ink and arrogance. On the simplest of things, expectation that the man wouldn't read. Denzel didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply pointed at the bottom line and looked past JD, straight to the public watching beyond the cameras. "This," Denzel said coolly, "is what happens when ego signs before the eyes do. No applause, no outbursts, just a tectonic shift in the energy of the room. Respect realigning itself like gravity." J.D. Vance, minutes ago bragging about real lawyers, had just walked into a legal buzzsaw, and Denzel didn't have to raise his voice, insult anyone, or even break a sweat. The law spoke for itself. The room was still absorbing the blow when Denzel's phone buzzed quietly against his palm, sharp and subtle. He didn't flinch. His eyes flicked to the name. Estrada, longtime Capitol reporter, political sniper when needed. One line, efficient, ruthless, alive, just dropped. "Play it. You'll know when." Denzel tapped the notification. The video loaded. A still frame of J.D. Vance holding a drink, jacket unbuttoned, surrounded by deep pocket donors. No podium, no filters. Just whiskey breath and raw prejudice. The angle was low, but the audio was crystal clear. Every syllable, sharp as glass. This wasn't politics. This was confession. Denzel's eyes stayed on the pause screen, reading the timing, calculating impact. This wasn't a smear. This was an implosion waiting to happen. Tapping his mic gently, Denzel addressed the committee. "Madam Chair, I request to introduce supplemental context to the record. A time-stamped, unedited video from October 2021. A ripple moved through the room. JD's head tilted, suspicion forming into concern. "Objection," JD barked, unverified. Out of context, Denzel didn't let him finish. "The context," he said calmly, "is your own words, Senator. Captured at a private fundraiser. No edits, no commentary. Just you. The chair nodded once. Proceed. The screen behind them blinked to life. The video began to play. JD's voice filled the chamber. Smug, slurred with confidence. She's loud, not learned. From some Houston night school, doesn't even count. Laughter echoed in the footage. Rich, complicit, ugly. JD swirled his drink like a man toasting his own ignorance. In the hearing room, gasps surfaced like aftershocks. A staffer's pen hit the floor. Another's hand went to her mouth. And Denzel Washington, unmoving, silent, let the truth burn the rest for him. The clip ended on JD's voice, clear and cutting. America needs lawyers, not noise. And his, all noise. Silence stretched tight across the chamber, suffocating like plastic wrap over an open flame. The camera cut to JD live, face pale, jaw clenched, eyes blinking in disbelief, watching his past self tear apart his present self in front of the entire nation. Denzel Washington didn't even glance his way. His focus stayed on the chair, voice steady, smooth, but crackling with controlled voltage. I won't dignify that clip with a defense, Denzel said calmly, every syllable landing like steel on stone. I'll let the American people decide whether law degrees are determined by neighborhoods or by checkbooks. Then his gaze shifted, locking on JD, measured, cool, devastating. But let the record show, I didn't have to say a word. His tone stayed even. You did. JD shifted in his seat, suddenly restless. His fingers fumbled with his tie, tightening it. Like a noose. His hands tapped the table, but without rhythm, without the false confidence he'd carried minutes before. His power dissolved quietly, publicly. Denzel leaned back, expression unreadable. But inside the chamber, and across living rooms nationwide, everyone watching knew they had just witnessed it, the first visible crack in JD Vance's armor. And it hadn't come from any attack. It came straight from his own mouth. Because sometimes the strongest foundation for justice, Denzel said, pausing just enough, isn't marble columns. It's concrete sidewalks walked by tired feet and unshakable will. The chamber sat breathless. Denzel let the silence work for him, then leaned into the microphone. Slower now, voice like thunder beneath calm waters. Let me tell you about the case no one wanted, he said, his tone smooth but weighty. Because that's where I earned my degree for real. The screen behind Denzel flickered, cutting to a plain, unsmiling mugshot. A black woman, early 40s, bruised, hollow-eyed, forgotten by the system. Her name was Lydia. Denzel's voice dropped, words clicking out like the steady turn of a lock. Controlled, unforgiving, no fingerprints. No witnesses, no weapon, Denzel said. Just a confession signed after 19 hours without food, without a lawyer. Jade's jaw tensed, shoulders tight, but Denzel wasn't looking his way. He wasn't talking to JD anymore. He was talking to America. No. Firm took her case, Denzel continued. No donors showed up. She had no name, no money, no advocates. The public didn't need evidence. Black woman, domestic dispute, must be guilty. His voice didn't rise. It pressed forward, relentless. They gave me 40 hours, Denzel said, turning briefly to the committee. That's what the state pays a public defender, 40 hours to save a life. His hand hovered above his stack of files. I gave her 400. The gasps didn't come. The room just stopped. People stopped blinking. Even the air felt arrested. JD's smirk faltered just enough for the cameras to capture the crack. I visited her every Sunday. I pulled in medical experts, found a forensics professor at Rice who proved the wounds didn't match her hand strength. Denzel's stare narrowed, voice razor sharp. And I found the neighbor, the one nobody ever interviewed, who saw a different man run out the back door. A pause, the room braced. Denzel's gaze swept across the chamber like a scalpel slicing through fiction. 12 minutes, he said. That's how long it took the jury to set her free. First time she saw daylight in 3 years. Somewhere, a breath escaped, loud, unrestrained, like someone forgetting they'd been holding it. But Denzel wasn't done. She hugged me outside that courthouse, Denzel said, steady as bedrock. She told me you were the first person who saw me as human. Denzel leaned in, not louder, just deeper. I went home that night and tore up every job offer that started with, "You'd fit in better here." His voice turned into a slow blade. That's when I learned law isn't a trophy, it's a weapon, and if you don't protect it, it'll get used to hurt the very people it was supposed to defend. JD crossed his arms, faking indifference, but his jaw told the truth. It was clenched, locked against words he couldn't fight. I didn't win that case with pedigree, Denzel said, never blinking. I won it because I didn't quit. He leaned back, shoulders relaxed. And if that makes me less real in your eyes, Senator, then maybe, just maybe, it's time we redefine what real even means. The screen behind Denzel faded to black, but Lydia's face lingered in the chamber, on the feeds, in the homes of millions of Americans watching. Because no diploma ever walked a woman off death row, but someone like Denzel Washington did. This time, Denzel didn't reach for files. He reached into his coat pocket, slow, unhurried, drawing out a creased, sun-faded letter. The kind of letter you don't keep because it's formal. You keep it because it's real. He unfolded it with reverence, like it carried a weight he could barely hold. This arrived 3 months ago, Denzel said, voice low but clear. From a woman named Rosa, 70 years old. No title, no platform. But her words didn't need either. JD shifted in his seat, impatient, restless. But Denzel ignored him, speaking straight to America now. He read, "Dear Mr. Washington, I don't have fancy words. I don't know much about the law, but I remember the day you sat on my old couch in my cold apartment and told me my eviction was illegal." JD's expression tightened. Another letter, another sob story, but this one was different. It wasn't proof, it was heartbeat. They wanted me out, Denzel continued, because my son got arrested, said I was a criminal mother, bringing trouble into their building. You didn't ask about my zip code. You looked me in the eyes. You made that man from the preparatory office read the housing code twice. Denzel's tone didn't waver. It sharpened. You didn't shout. You didn't threaten. But you made them listen. You didn't just protect my home. You protected my dignity. Denzel blinked once, steady, then kept going. They laughed at your school on the news last week. Said it was just some local campus. But I know which school taught you compassion, and I think compassion should be a required. Of course, the room held still, not with awkwardness, but with something closer to reverence. Denzel folded the letter back up carefully, like laying down armor after battle. He didn't look at JD. JD's discomfort was loud enough without a glance. Denzel looked directly into the lens, into homes across the country. They say the Ivy League teaches excellence, Denzel said slowly. But tell me, can it teach you how? To sit with a stranger in a freezing apartment and make them believe justice still belongs to them. He let it hang there, unanswered, because now it wasn't about schools anymore. It was about humanity. It wasn't about the degree anymore. It was about who you stood beside when the titles were stripped away and all that remained was the work you did and who you showed up for. Denzel Washington didn't blink. His voice stayed low, deliberate. Tell me, Senator, Denzel said quietly. Can a $300,000 degree teach you how to warm a freezing home with just your presence? The echo of his words barely faded before J.D. Vance leaned forward, fingers drumming his pen against the table with manufactured confidence. The rhythm was cocky, the smile practiced. I'm sure Rosa appreciates your stories, J.D. said, loud enough for the cameras to catch, tone slick with condescension. But law doesn't run on feelings, it runs on results. So, out of curiosity, what was your GPA again? The shift in the chamber was immediate. It wasn't the question. It was the smirk behind it, the assumption that grades were a dagger, that Denzel could be reduced to a number, repackaged into a stereotype. JD wasn't looking for an answer. He was looking for a weakness, something to fold Denzel into a convenient narrative, another diversity hire, another quota. Denzel didn't flinch. He didn't lean in. He didn't perform. He simply reached down into that same leather folder, the one that had been silent by his side all morning, and drew out a single-page plain, creased, unassuming. Not a prop, just truth. He unfolded it with a steady hand, turned it toward the microphones and the cameras, and his voice when it came was courtroom calm. Verdict steady. University of Houston Law Center. GPA 3,86 Denzel stated. Graduated magna cum laude. National Constitutional Law Thesis. First place. 2020. The gavel never fell, but it didn't have to. The words did the job. Reporters froze mid-sentence. An aide behind Senator Booker exhaled, a quiet whistle before realizing it. A silent beat stretched across the chamber, long enough for the camera to catch JD's jaw tighten. A flicker of something rattled beneath his polished exterior. Denzel clicked a small remote behind him. The screen came alive, lighting up with official transcripts, award certificates, and a photograph of Denzel standing on graduation day. His mother beside him in a wheelchair, the diploma in one hand and a plaque in the other. His gaze remained locked on JD. You want numbers? Denzel asked quietly. Here they are. No ghostwriters, no legacy pass, no family donations smoothing the way. Just midnight study sessions and courthouse clerk shifts at dawn. JD scratched his jaw like he was trying to summon a counterpunch from thin air. Anyone can flash a certificate, JD muttered. But the words came out thinner now, stretched over a foundation that had started to crumble. Denzel's eyebrow lifted. Slow, controlled. You mean like a Yale diploma? Denzel replied coolly. Because if you'd like to trade resumes, Senator, I don't recall hiring a paid consultant to write my entrance essay in 2018. The camera cut to JD, mid-blink. Mouth slightly ajar, before cutting back to Denzel.com, unmoved, surgical. You asked for my GPA, Denzel said evenly. But it feels like you were hoping I wouldn't remember yours. A ripple moved through the gallery. A restrained murmur rolling under the surface like distant thunder. Denzel turned back to the committee, voice crisp. This hearing was about qualifications, about who deserves to speak for the people. I don't think zip codes or expensive buildings decide that, Denzel said. Courtrooms do, people do, and I've stood in enough of them to know. Your voice doesn't have to bounce off marble to be real. JD sat still, unmoving, a statue built on borrowed swagger. Denzel clicked the remote again. The screen behind him powered down, silent, definitive. His degree wasn't supposed to mean anything. Yet, it had just cut through every insult JD had thrown his way. And the room hadn't recovered. JD's fingers hovered, uncertain, the smile long gone. Denzel didn't go for applause. He went for the closing argument, calm, sharp, final. He leaned in slightly, his gaze rising, not to JD, but to the monitors overhead. To the people watching, since we're discussing earned credentials, Denzel said conversationally, the country deserves the full story. No drama, no performance. Just a tap on the remote. The screen flickered again. This time the lo-fi logo of a forgotten podcast from 2018. The audio rolled out scratchy, raw, but clear enough to make the air snap taut. A chuckling host came through first. So you got into Yale law, man. And what was the secret? Then JD's voice, carefree. Tucker Carlson's voice hit the airwaves first, smug and biting. What we're seeing, Tucker sneered, isn't justice. It's performance art. Another street lawyer, he called Denzel, using race and grievance to shield himself from accountability. He dismissed Denzel's story as scripted hardship, accused him of playing victim. Twisting the nights Denzel spent beside his mother's hospital bed into political theater. He smirked through the monologue as if swatting away invisible nuisances, every gesture choreographed to mock, belittle, and discredit without ever lifting a single real fact. Denzel didn't need to watch to know the routine. He'd seen it all before. Under the glare of studio lights, Tucker Carlson wore his grin like a weapon, every word oozing with manufactured disdain. We're not watching jurisprudence, Tucker mocked. This is justice cosplay. Ben Shapiro's voice followed, rapid and sharp, like an axe swinging at nuance. She paraded a judge's letter like it was scripture, Shapiro said, his tone slick with derision. Judges get things wrong all the time. But sure, let's pretend this is law. They weren't speaking to inform. They were speaking to exhaust, to drain America's empathy before it could bloom. From the Daily Wire, to Breitbart, Reddit, threads to YouTube rants, the assault moved like a wave, coordinated, relentless, brutal. J.D. Vance didn't even have to lift a finger. The machine did it for him. One influencer mocked Denzel's plain suit, calling it government issue swag. Another posted, "Real lawyers don't cry about grades. They dominate arguments." Denzel's work, his courtroom victories, his clients, none of it mattered in their soundbites. Nobody mentioned the legal document J.D. had signed without reading, but the sharpest dagger came during a primetime panel 2 nights later. A grinning host leaned in. If Denzel Washington is so brilliant, why didn't he get into Yale? A guest, smug and rehearsed, delivered the punchline. Because Yale doesn't offer scholarships for trauma narratives. Laughter followed, loud and forced. Not because it was funny, but because silence might lead to self-reflection. And that was the real danger. In a quiet office, lined with old books and awards, Denzel sat surrounded by muted screens full of noise. His aide asked softly, "You want to respond?" Denzel shook his head, calm and resolute. "If I respond, they'll say it's emotion," he said, switching off the TV. "If I stay quiet, they'll call it strategy. Either way, they talk." On the ticker below, a headline blinked, "Washington cracks under pressure." Denzel smiled. Faintly, "Let them guess." Beyond the office, the storm raged. Headlines dissected his silence, speculating had he gone too far. Was he retreating? Planning his next strike? Emails poured in. Interview requests, reaction requests, invites to scream into the void. But Denzel had been raised on principle, not panic. He knew every hit job, every insult, every cheap shot revealed one truth: how much they feared a man who stood tall without the shield of privilege. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance cruised through local media. On a Cincinnati radio show, he laughed off the controversy. "She's playing Victim Olympics," J.D. joked. "I'm playing chess." He didn't see the host's forced smile. He didn't notice that outside his bubble, the country's focus wasn't tightening on Denzel, it was tightening on him. Because when millions watch a man stand his ground, while the nation throws stones, the debate stops being about degrees. It becomes about dignity, about who has it, and who is terrified of it. Then, just when the media storm hit its peak, a voice emerged from a place J.D. never saw coming. Yale, not the students, not Twitter threads, but Professor Edward Halberstam, former chair of criminal law, and the man J.D. once quoted in his memoir. He didn't appear on TV or grandstand on social media. He published one op-ed in the New York Times, and by noon, America stopped scrolling to read Denzel Washington. It began. Didn't come from abstract theory. He came from the crucible of real justice, where there are no whiteboards, no cold brew, just blood, fear, and the gasping breath of the Constitution under fire. Halberstam's words didn't trend, they thundered. And then came the line that swept across campuses, printed on t-shirts from Harlem to Oakland. Denzel Washington is the real-world model of American law in action. And those of us who taught J.D. Vance never taught him contempt disguised as pedigree. The shift was instant. Social media didn't just reverse it, ignited. Clips of the hearing resurfaced, captioned, "One earned it, one bought it." Real doesn't need a brand. But it wasn't Halberstam's endorsement that shattered the dam. It was a letter, simple, handwritten, arriving at the committee office, from a man with no Ivy League ties, no fancy title, just history written in scars. A retired Latino infantryman, an Iraq veteran. The handwriting was blocky, the signature shaky, but every word carried steel. "I don't know law," the letter read. "I only know who stood beside me when everyone else looked away." He recounted his arrest, back home wrongly accused, A paperwork error. They said his public defender was Denzel Washington. He didn't just get my charges dropped, the veteran wrote. He exposed a forged police report. He got the man who framed me prosecuted. No diploma could compete with that. J.D. Vance may have talked law, but Denzel Washington lived it. In courtrooms no one wanted to step into, in neighborhoods ignored by power. Every headline that tried to paint him as loud crumbled under the weight of something greater respect. Even Yale, the institution J.D. worshipped, broke its silence. When asked by CNN if Denzel would have been welcomed as a student, Professor Halberstam didn't hesitate. "We didn't just miss the chance to teach him," he said. "We missed the chance to learn from him." Denzel never raised his voice. He didn't wave degrees or drop names. He stood still, and the country finally saw that this was never about titles. It was about who stood tall when it mattered. When the people who trained your opponent line up behind you, the question shifts. Who's the expert now? By sunrise, the steps of Congress weren't filled with politicians, they were filled with people. Veterans in faded uniforms, single mothers clutching court files, students carrying worn civics books. They didn't come to riot, they came to reclaim justice. No call to action had gone out, no rallying cry had been posted. They came anyway from Houston, from Detroit, from Oakland. Some with cardboard signs scribbled in kitchens, others with nothing but their voices. One sign said it all: his degree saved his ego. Denzel saved lives. Reporters tried to spin it as partisan, but this wasn't left or right. This was real. Near the front, a grieving mother held a photo of her son. Her whisper cracked the air. Denzel stood up for me when no one else would. Inside, J.D. Vance stared through the window, his suit crisp, his tie perfect. But for the first time, none of it mattered. Outside, the law didn't belong to pedigrees, it belonged to the people. Denzel didn't go to the crowd. He didn't need to. He stood tall in the hearing chamber, silent but unshaken. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to the committee. It was to America. "I've been called names, told my degree was fake, but I didn't come here to defend my title," Denzel said. "I came here because I buried a mother while reading case law, because I fought for those no one listened to, because I read every line of the Constitution not to climb, but to catch the people falling through it. No documents, no theatrics, just truth, spoken low but landing like thunder. I don't need to be believed. I need justice to matter more than polish. And if it doesn't, then what are we even doing here?" Then he simply sat down. No applause, no victory lap, just silence. Thick, powerful, undeniable. It wasn't about credentials anymore, it was about conviction. And conviction doesn't beg, it stands. The next morning, the internet didn't roar, it trembled. From professors to soldiers, from students to survivors, one voice echoed across every screen. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the bar. J.D. cancelled his interviews. Denzel went home. No press tour, no self-congratulation, just a quiet binder on his kitchen table and history rewritten. Because in a world obsessed with noise, Denzel Washington reminded us, stillness can shake nations.